A group of immigration advocates gathered near the Capitol to protest two border-related bills today. One would create a new border security law enforcement agency that would target people crossing the border illegally. Another would develop a new court system for immigration-related cases. Charlotte Scott reports on why some Texans think these bills are needed and why others say they're xenophobic.
A group of immigration advocates gathered near the Texas Capitol Wednesday to protest two border-related bills.
It is time for all of us to stand up and say no.
One would allow local law enforcement to arrest, detain, and deter individuals crossing the border illegally. The state-run Border Protection Unit could also charge them with a third-degree felony for walking onto private property. Another bill would develop a new court system to handle immigration cases.
That to me, and that to all of us here, is the definition of anti-immigrant.
Roberto Lopez is with the Texas Civil Rights Project. He and the other immigration advocates are looking out for migrants like Rafael Jose Castañeda, a Venezuelan in Juarez, Mexico. He plans to cross the border into Texas, but these bills make him nervous. He says there's no reason to catch us, arrest us, and charge us for things we haven't even faced in our own country. It's illogical. Others say the legislation is needed to address migrant surges in Texas.
We trust law enforcement. We trust Governor Abbott to go down a proper route and do what's in the best interest of the citizens and legal residents of Texas, not people who are coming here illegally and breaking our laws.
R.J. Hallman is with Texans for Strong Borders. Governor Greg Abbott has spent billions of dollars on his border initiative, Operation Lone Star. Hallman says this expenditure is needed in the absence of federal help.
The federal government has completely gutted their responsibility to enforce the law.
The lower chamber allocated another $4.6 billion for border security efforts in its budget last week, and Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan has voiced his support for the two border bills. But immigration advocates think Texas tax dollars should instead be invested in border communities. And they worry about people like Castañeda, who, regardless of these laws, will still try to come to Texas for a better life. He says we want to go to work and produce, and above all, help our families morally and financially. A dream this group wants everyone to be able to achieve. For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
And joining us now to discuss this further is George Lobb. He's an immigration attorney based in Austin. Mr. Lobb, welcome back to the program. Nice to see you.
Good evening.
This Border Protection Unit bill really tests the boundaries of the state's ability to enforce immigration law. So how do you think this would even stand up to legal challenges?
So several parts of the bill address certain issues. The one issue that will stand up is the penalization both on the misdemeanor and felony level of certain conduct. So trespassing essentially is what they're doing. They're enhancing the trespassing penalty depending on the point of origin of the accused. I think that will stand up because the state has an inherent right to enforce police powers. That's 200+ year precedent of the Supreme Court. What may not stand up is an actual separate court system. I don't think that'll meet equal protection grounds because that comes to whether a county is going to agree to allow that to happen. What's not going to work and what I don't think will pass constitutional muster in the current Supreme Court is the idea that Texas officials can return migrants to Mexico or a third country without the assistance of the federal government. The federal government is the sole authority that has power over immigration issues and over immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, I mean, what about this proposal and taking into account working with Mexico as well? I mean, which they would have to agree, correct, in having people returned to that country?
Correct. There's a treaty between the United States and Mexico for this, but there's also a treaty that the United States and Mexico signed about the return of refugees. And so there's a non-refoulement policy on return of refugees, that if someone comes and applies for asylum or refugee status, that you may not return them. That's a violation of Article 24. But for practical purposes, Mexico shares a 1,200-mile border with Texas. Modern civil engineering makes it impossible to build a wall. That's not going to happen. We don't have enough money to do it. The East Germans couldn't keep their own people in. Who are we to think that we can keep people out of a 1,200-mile long border? But aside from that, the real cause of this migration, and if we address these issues as a country, then maybe that will actually reduce flows. In the 1960s and 70s, we had a very successful worker program where migrants were allowed in, they worked for 6 to 9 months and then had to go back for a period and then they came back. And after 15 or 20 years, they had enough money to buy a house or do something else to better their lives, and they stayed in their home country. The more difficult you make it for an immigrant to enter the United States, the more likely they are to stay. And if the Republican Party and the current government wants people out, then don't make it difficult for them to enter. And this is not anecdotal, this is empirical evidence, but they don't want to look at that because this is popular politically. We know this if you look at the social media feeds of the government, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and other Republican politicians. You see that they have almost no criticism of the federal government enforcement or lack thereof of immigration law prior to January 2020. Look at January 2020 today, and you'll see a lot more criticism. This is merely an attack on the White House. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Democrat. I'm not a Republican either.
Sure.
I'm saying that as a former political science student. Look at their campaign and how they communicate. So,
Mr. Law, we will have to leave it there, an issue we'll continue to discuss. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. For more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app and tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV to get live news coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.